Hello, and welcome on the Barricades. This is a podcast produced by Eastern European journalists and academics, and I am your host, Maria Чернат, and with me, as usual, the co-host of the show, the Bulgarian-born Polish journalist Boyan Stanиславski, and our special guest, famous political analyst, commentator, and a person who had critical perspectives on both US and Russia. He recently gave an excellent interview for the Grey Zone where he discusses critically the military campaign in Ukraine. And of course, we are going to discuss right now what's going on. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, the referendum that is going to take place in the territories that Russia already occupied, and the decision of mobilizing 300,000 people who are reservists, but now are going to be mobilized. And what I want to ask is about these things, and how do you interpret it in the whole economy of this military conflict?
Well, I mean, this special military operation, as Russia calls it, the brutal, aggressive invasion of Ukraine, as NATO, the United States, and the West calls it, and I think the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, as the rest of the world calls it, has unfolded in stages. Let's start with at least my operating assumptions. This is a war started by NATO. End of story, full stop. There's really not much else to talk about. This war would not have occurred had there not been NATO expansion, had there not been an effort by NATO to lure Ukraine into its ranks, and had not NATO conspired with the United States and others to overthrow an elected representative of the Ukrainian people, Viktor Yanukovych, replace him with a coup d'etat. And there's no other way to call the Maidan. It's not a dignity demonstration or whatever. It was a coup carried out by violent neo-Nazi thugs that were responsive to right-wing political parties loyal to the memory of a brutal, murderous person named Stepan Bandera. I don't know how else to describe this. The government that followed was not a democratic government. It was handpicked by the United States. One only needs to recall the intercepted phone conversation of Victoria Nuland, who bragged about my boy Yatsenko, the future prime minister of Ukraine. So let's stop pretending that this is a war where Russia has brutally invaded a viable democracy and that this is a struggle between autocracy and democracy. It's not. This is the United States and NATO and the European Union using Ukraine as a vehicle to undermine Russia. This is a concerted effort by the West to undo the policies of Vladimir Putin, to reverse Russia's ascension to what Russia views as its rightful place in the global order, and to have Russia return to the times of Boris Yeltsin, where the Russian nation was considered to be defeated at the end of the Cold War and was basically existed only to be exploited economically and politically by the West. Now I say this as a Westerner. I don't say this as a Russian, because I'm not a Russian, I'm an American. I know what we did to Russia in the 1990s. I know exactly what we did. We bragged about it. People talk about Russia stealing an American election in 2016. They tend to forget that Time magazine published a cover bragging about how we stole a Russian election, the 1996 election that put Boris Yeltsin back into power. We stole it. We bragged about how we did this. So I think Russia knows the truth. Maybe in Eastern Europe, you know the truth. You should. You're well positioned to know the truth. But,
not much, especially in the mainstream press.
Well, I mean,
mean,
if you allow, I think that this part of Eastern Europe where we are, like Romania and Poland, and the part of Eastern Europe that is in the European Union, is basically part of what the Russians refer to as collective West. We are now becoming a part of it. Like, of course, territorially speaking, we're close to Russia, close to Ukraine, close to Belarus, and we should know better. And we should have experts and politicians and scientists and activists, most of all, I would say, who should know better. But it's not happening. But it's an entirely different story.
Okay. Well, yeah, right. And look, I'm an American looking at this issue from 1,000 miles removed. I've been to Romania, never been to Bulgaria. I can't claim to have intimate knowledge of how these nations and the people that populate them function politically. I would say that if you're not, it doesn't mean that you have to be pro-Russian or sympathetic to Russia. I mean,
it's enough to be rational sometimes, right?
Say again?
It's enough to be rational sometimes and look at things without like unnecessary emotional,
There's no excuse for Eastern Europe not to at least have the intellectual capacity to examine Russia from a fact-based perspective. And there's no reason for Eastern Europe to buy into the ignorance-laced rhetoric that comes out of Washington, D.C., Brussels, Paris, London, et cetera. There's literally no excuse. There's none whatsoever. It's intellectual laziness.
Intellectual bankruptcy, I would say.
Bankruptcy, yeah, it's an even stronger word. I'm trying not to be too insulting to people. But look, at this point in time, with all due respect to everybody listening and anybody who might feel insulted, I don't care. We're looking at casualties that are unthinkable. You claim to care, not you personally, but people who claim to care about Ukraine, your policies have resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Ukrainians, hundreds of thousands wounded, a nation being destroyed as we speak. And we speak of the referendum coming up. Understand this, Ukraine will never be the same. Never be the same. If you live in Bulgaria, imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that 25% of your country no longer is yours. Romania, 25% gone. That's what's happened to Ukraine. There's going to be a referendum. We know what the outcome is going to be. That the territories will vote to become part of Russia, and Russia will incorporate them. And then it's Mother Russia, and whether Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, NATO, Europe, the United States say we don't recognize it, Russia doesn't care. I oftentimes bring this up just tongue in cheek, but it's true. There's a meme here in the United States about the honey badger. And the honey badger is, of course, a North American mammal, very, very stubborn and aggressive. And it shows the honey badger, and honey badger don't care. Honey badger don't care about you, me, nothing. Honey badger does what the honey badger wants to do. Russia, we call it the bear. I'm calling it the honey badger. Russia don't care. Russia's going to incorporate it, call it Mother Russia, and treat anybody accordingly who fails to recognize that. Russia doesn't care if you don't recognize Kherson as Mother Russia. If you attack Kherson, you're attacking Mother Russia, and you will be treated accordingly. This is the new reality. So we start with the notion that this is a war that Russia didn't want, Russia didn't ask for, but it was forced on Russia. It was a war that began in 2014 with the coup, continued for 8 years. People tend to forget that the Ukrainians were pounding Donbass with artillery, killing tens of thousands of residents of that territory. A Ukrainian president, Poroshenko, bragged about how Ukrainian children would be going to school while the children in the Donbass would be hiding in a basement. It's a war crime. It's a war crime. Same president, Poroshenko, brags about how the Minsk peace process was never meant to be real. That Ukraine was simply using it as a vehicle to buy time so that NATO could train a Ukrainian army capable of conquering the Donbass. This is the reality. This is the reality that Russia deals with, the West ignores, but it's what led to the special military operation. Special military operation is just that, a special military operation. It is not war. Let's just put some definitions straight. If it was war, it'd be over by now. Because if it was war, Russia would have gone in full hog, doctrinally.
I want to ask something here. You said that there was no other option, and that's very hard for me to buy. I mean, don't they have like secret services? I mean, you have such a vast experience with all the security apparatus, and you of all people know that there are other ways to fight wars. Why did it come to this? What were they doing? They knew since 2014 that things will go in the wrong direction for them. Why not infiltrate their parties? They're, doing all the things the secret services do to prevent this from happening.
Well, first of all, I think what we'll see when we talk about phase one of the special military operations, that the secret services were involved. But one thing that people don't respect about Russia, and again, I'm not putting Russia on a pedestal. I'm not. But the Russians are a nation founded in law. And you could say that this goes back to Soviet times. There's a book written by a guy named Merle Feinsod about Smolensk, about the Soviet rule in Smolensk, and it was derived from files that were captured by the Germans when they invaded. They captured the local Communist Party files, and afterwards, the files were transferred to the United States, and Merle Feinsod was able to go through it and wrote this book. And it's a horrible book. It's about basically the oppression of the people of Smolensk by Soviet authorities and mass murder, etc. But the one thing that you're struck about reading this book is that everything was done legally. It wasn't that the Cheka or the NKVD came in and just wantonly murdered people. No, they arrested you. Then they put you on trial. You had to sign confessions. Everything was documented. Everything was recorded because the law had to be complied with. In Russia, I'm not trying to say that Russia is the same as Soviet times. I'm saying that Russia is about the law. There are things they can do. There's things they can't do. And it has to be done procedurally and documented. Russia made a decision, and I'll also say this, they keep talking about Vladimir Putin as being this, autocratic dictator-like figure who is impulsive and he just does whatever. I mean, Vlad wakes up in the morning, decides to invade Ukraine, and he invades Ukraine. It doesn't work that way. Vladimir Putin is the executive authority, elected, by the way, through a democratic process, of a nation, the Russian nation, that is a body of laws. I'm not going to get too far ahead, but the special military, or the limited mobilization, partial mobilization that was announced by Putin, the laws cited were all written in the 1990s before Putin became president. So it's not like Putin's waking up going, I'm going to make this up as I go along, guys. It's Russian law. It's Russian policy.
Right.
So,
could you speak about that a little bit? Because what does this partial mobilization mean now? What do you think is going to unfold? What is going to change? Because I feel that what we're going to see is some kind of qualitative change. I mean, now I feel like the showdown is coming because, as you said, like all those territories that are controlled partially or totally by the Russian army, they're going to become incorporated. They're going to become part of the Russian Federation in one way or another. And this is going to happen relatively soon because, that's what was announced. I mean, those referendums are going to be held like in a matter of weeks or something like that. And then
days.
There's days. Sorry, yeah. So then it's like we're going to have a decision by the Russian Duma, and that's it. It's over. From that moment on, it becomes Russian territory, and then all those constraints, legal or whatever other constraints of what they refer to as the special military operation, they're off. Now the Russian military is going to be doing everything in their power in order to protect what they will then, interpret legally as part of their territory, as part of their, Russian territory, Russian Federation, Russian nation, right? If you like.
Right.
So I wonder if you could speak about that also, with the view that from, what I remember from programs featuring yourself that I watched in the past, you were rather skeptical whether they would actually, call up the reservists. You said like they don't really need to do that because they've got like 1 million men standing army, and they still have that. All those arguments sounded very rational, but I'm thinking if you could explain to us why, despite those arguments that you put forward, they still decided to do that.
Right. Well, in order to understand what Russia's doing now, though, we have to go back to, again, first principles. of the special military operation. What was it? It wasn't an invasion of Ukraine. Special military operation is military action authorized under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. It speaks of self-defense, but the Russians have an expansive version of definition of self-defense that the rest of the world shares. It's law, international law. The Caroline Affair actually happened between the United States and Great Britain in the 1830s. Talks about preemptive self-defense, that a nation can carry out a preemptive act, can carry out an offensive action to preempt an aggression so long as the threat from the aggression is deemed to be imminent and real. Russia, for a long time, Putin, for instance, when the Donbass declared independence, when the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic declared their independence initially, Russia refused to recognize that. Why? Because Russia said, you're part of Ukraine. You're an integral part of Ukraine. We will defend the Russian nation, meaning we will defend your rights, but we will do so only in the context that you are part of Ukraine. That was Putin's policy. That was the Russian policy. That was the right policy. Now, Russia felt betrayed by Minsk because it became clear that Ukraine never intended to protect the rights of Russians, that they only intended to basically complete the task of de-Russification. Think about it. The laws passed by Ukraine, no Russian language, no Russian culture, no Russian literature, take out the word Russian, put in Jew, and you've got Germany in the 1930s, literally. Say that's how a Russian should view it, because it's literally targeting the Russians for a genocidal type eradication within the borders of Ukraine. So Russia said, we recognize you as independent now. They did that right before the special military operation. Then they formed a collective security arrangement, which gave them authority under Article 51 to preempt the buildup of 60,000 Ukrainian troops, NATO trained, by the way, who are getting ready to launch an attack into the Donbass to complete the task of removing the Russians. So this was an operation that was designed to free these newly independent republics of Ukrainian armed forces and to protect them from further attack. The Russians had a right under this to expand the military operation to that degree necessary to nullify the imminent threat posed by the Ukrainian military to Donbass. That's the entire structure right there. In order to do that, Russia did a number of things. One, they expanded the bridgehead out of Crimea into Kherson to protect Crimea, also to secure the water. Two, they created a land bridge connecting Crimea and Kherson with Donbass and the Russian Federation. That land bridge reaches up through the Sea of Azov. This was deemed necessary to secure the southern approaches to Donbass. Russia also made a feint at Kiev to lock in Ukrainian troops to help prepare. All of this is done within the context of the special military operation. The special military operation, because it's not war, constrains Russia legally what it can and can't do in terms of the implementation of this conflict. Literally, Russia is going in with one hand tied behind their back, literally. This is not doctrinal war. Anybody who has studied Russian doctrine knows that what Russia has done to date is so far removed from doctrine as to make it unrecognizable. Anybody who knows how Russia fights, trains to fight, and is prepared to fight knows that what has happened between February 24th and today is not how Russia fights. This is different. And it's a good thing for the people of Ukraine and, frankly speaking, the Ukrainian military that Russia is doing this, because otherwise the results will be much worse than what they are. It's bad for Russia. Russia's taking casualties they shouldn't take. Russia suffered military reversals it should never have suffered. The Chechen leader Kadyrov begged back in March and April, untie my hands. Let us fight the way we're supposed to fight. He begged, but he wasn't allowed to because legally he couldn't. Special military operation. What's happening now? NATO's decision to send billions of dollars of military assistance to Ukraine has transformed the nature of this conflict. It's no longer a special military operation. NATO has, in effect, declared war against Russia. Now, all the NATO officials say, oh, no, we haven't. We're just simply providing weaponry. But it's not providing weaponry. They have reconfigured the Ukrainian army to be a virtual NATO military force. Even though it's not protected under Article 5 of the NATO charter. It is a NATO military, organized like a NATO military, equipped, trained, operated, receives the intelligence, communications, logistics. And Russia has determined that this has fundamentally changed the nature of the special military operation, to the extent that if Russia doesn't alter its approach, it will not be able to accomplish its objectives, and it puts the Russian nation at risk. And let's talk about the Russian nation, because that's an important term right now. We can't just talk about the Russian people. Putin doesn't talk about the Russian people. He talks about the Russian nation. The Russian nation is distinct from the Russian Federation. The Russian nation are those people, regardless of ethnicity, who have shared history, culture, religion. That is the Russian nation, and there are parts of Ukraine that Russia deems to be the Russian nation, even though they're under Ukrainian sovereign control, just like in the Baltics. There's parts of the Baltics that are the Russian nation. So Putin is pledged to defend. Now, this mobilization, let's talk about what it is, and let's talk about what it isn't.
All right, but before you continue, can I just throw in one more question here? Because I'm thinking that, okay, this was from the military, from the military standpoint, from the art of war standpoint, so to say. This was a very strange war, in a sense that, you know, the Russian army with one hand tied behind their back, like the strange proportion. Normally you're supposed to have like 3-1 or something like that when you're attacking, in order to be able to have, you know, to stand a chance, and so on and so forth. So all those things, yeah, I get it. But it was also a very strange war. You know, it's been a very strange war for us to see. Like, you know, the internet's on, the electricity's on, the trains are running, the trams are running, the public transit is moving. You know, people
yes,
in Kiev
a lot
are
of
partying in the
leaders
night.
are visiting Kiev.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
everybody's
Trips
going
to Kiev.
Kiev.
I was joking with Maria, like the day before, like, are we gonna now book a trip to Kiev, because it becomes such a popular destination, you know,
Tourist destination. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, and Zelensky and the entire propaganda apparatus, it's all been left in place. Now, the question is this going to change? I mean, do you think that from now on, once they take off the kids' gloves, are they going to start going after, you know, the high command, the political elite, you know, the strategic objects like the electricity grid, which they did actually destroy partially? I mean, it was, I think, repaired within 24 or 48 hours. But do you think we're going to see more of it? And are they going to feel the power, if you like, the firepower of the Russian army now? Because apparently they're going to probably, you know, change the legal parlance to, I don't know, whatever it's going to be, like defense of Russia or anti-terrorist operations, some say. What do you think?
Look, I helped plan and implement a war against Iraq, Operation Desert Storm. We initiated it with a strategic air campaign. We took everything out. No electricity in Baghdad, no electricity in Iraq. We blew up everything. That's how you do it. We blew up the bridges. We blew up the roads. We blew up the trains. We blew up the political decision-making centers. If we thought you were in a bunker, we blew up the bunker. We blew everything up, everything. We did that for 6 weeks. Then when we started to roll in, it took us 100 hours to get the Iraqis to surrender. 100 hours. They were the 4th largest army at the time, coming off of an 8-year war with Iran where they were victorious. So they weren't, this wasn't a pushover. This wasn't 2003 against a defeated army that never had a chance to rebuild. We took on the 4th largest army in the world, and we hit them with a strategic air campaign that so weakened them that when our military rolled across the border, not only did we kill 100,000 of them that quick, we could have killed 30, 40,000 more had we just kept the war going on for 24 hours. It was annihilation, because that's what happens when a superior military force with superior military doctrine and superior military technology goes up against another army like that. It's a one-sided fight. Russia tied its hands behind its back. When Russia decides that it will no longer self-limit, what you're going to see happen to Ukraine is what happened to Iraq. It will be one-sided. It will be devastating. It will be total. You're not going to get Zelensky having a temper tantrum before the various elected bodies of the world, where he has internet access and is able to broadcast his image into the United States Congress, the British Parliament, the European Parliament. Those days are done. The idea of Zelensky feeling free enough to meet with foreign officials? No. No trains will be running into Ukraine. No trucks will be running. Ask a Jordanian truck driver what it was like trying to run the gauntlet from the Jordanian border to Baghdad. Not too many of them made it because we had aircraft flying over, bombing them all the time. No trucks will make it. No trains will make it. Bridges will drop. Roads will be bombed, pocketed. It's going to be a completely different reality. Russia made a decision going in that they were going to preserve as much civilian infrastructure as possible and bend over backwards to preserve civilian life. It doesn't mean that Russia wants to commit a war crime, but in a war, all the military has to do when looking at something is decide, is it a protected site, a hospital, a religious thing, schools, things of that nature, or does it have a military aspect to it? And a hospital can become militarized if they put anti-aircraft guns on it. Then the question is there a military necessity to strike the site? And if the answer is yes, the only other thing you have to ask is the damage that we will do proportional to the interest we have in striking it? Meaning, if I'm going to hit one anti-aircraft gun, is it worth killing 1,000 civilians? And most people would say that's disproportional, therefore we don't strike. But only Russia gets to make that call. International law simply says you have to ask the question, what is the military necessity? What is the issue of proportionality? If Russia determines that there's military necessity, regardless of the proportionality, then it's going to be bombed, and that's just the way it is. So far, Russia has basically said that any civilian casualties eliminate necessity, so that Russia, instead of preemptively bombing the target, has been sending troops in to do the unheard of, things that in the United States we would never do. We would never send troops into harm's way to remove civilians from a basement when the enemy was dug in on the top. We would just drop the building and call the civilians collateral casualties. The Russians have been sacrificing their own blood and flesh to save civilians from that. The Russians have been the most honorable warriors in modern history imaginable.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, we don't know what happened there. And unfortunately, I have to push back a little bit on that. And coming back, to my initial question, why do we have to witness this? I mean, don't they have secret services? Apparently, the Russians were able to put a president in the United States, but they were not able to put a president in Kiev. I mean, why? And
well, first
why
of all, Russia didn't.
this?
Now I'm going to push back. I'm going to make the statement again. You can push back all you want. The Russians have been the most honorable military force in modern history. I challenge you to come up with a fact that contradicts me. I challenge you. If you can't, then you can say, I disagree with you, Scott. Be careful about pushing back, because
yes,
I've studied
I disagree
the issue.
Because there's nothing honorable about war in general.
You're talking to a Marine who is trained to fight war honorably. I'm trained to fight war in accordance with the rule of law. I don't make the decision to go to war. My political authorities do, and when they grant me the legal authority to wage conflict, I will wage it as ruthlessly as necessary to destroy the enemy with as minimal harm to civilians. And once an enemy raises their hand and surrenders, I take them prisoner, I treat their wounds, I feed them, and I don't torture them, unlike the Ukrainians. All right, so I'm going to sit here and push back. It's not that I'm pro-Russian, but I'm a military professional who's been to war. I'm watching what the Russians are doing. I'm saying, hats off to you guys. Good job. Now you say, is there another option other than war? There should always be an option other than war. You're talking to an intelligence professional. Okay, I know what it's like to do regime change. I know what you do. First of all, Russia isn't in the business of regime change. Not like the United States, where we do it all the time.
So you say they lack the experience, or
no? I'm saying they lack the political instruction. If Russia wanted to, we know they can. We saw what the Soviets did in Afghanistan. All right, 1979, Kabul, regime change. All right, Spetsnaz went in, took out the leadership, replaced them with somebody they wanted. But that's not this Russia. This Russia doesn't do regime change. This Russia sought and bent over backwards to work within the framework of international law and the policies that the United States, Germany, and France. Remember the Normandy group? Supposed to have a discussion. Russia bought into that. Don't criticize Russia for actually trying to accomplish the job diplomatically. Russia did everything it was supposed to do. It was France, Germany, and the United States that lied. They used the Normandy format while NATO trained Ukrainian forces, 1 battalion every 55 days, 7 days straight, built a military capable of launching an unprovoked war into the Donbass. That was NATO. Russia said, let's give peace a chance. Let's try and find a negotiated solution. Now, when the decision was made that they had to transfer this, look, there's every reason to believe that the Russian 5th Directorate of the FSB, which is responsible for these areas, did their best to recruit people. I'm not saying the Russians are asleep at the wheel. Intelligence is about collecting information, not just covert action. All right, so there's no doubt in my mind that the Russians had placed people inside the Ukrainian government and that they had sought to say, hey, look, we're coming in. What we need you to do is we need the military to stand down. We need the civilian areas to let us in because we have to demilitarize. We have to get rid of these Nazis. We have to get rid of the Azov Regiment. We have to get rid of Right Sector, Sloboda, all these parties that have targeted Russians for genocidal type treatment. We have to get rid of them. And I believe that the Russian leadership thought that they had an intelligence success. I believe when they first went in and told their guys, just keep driving, don't worry about your flanks, don't worry about the rear, go as far as you can to make a statement so that the Ukrainian government collapses, that they were told this was going to happen by their intelligence service. They failed. You know what's wrong with relying on intelligence? It ain't perfect. It fails. Sometimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong dramatically. And that happened to the Russians. I believe the Russians thought they were going to have an easier shot at taking down the Kiev government simply by intimidating them. They were told by people, and we saw, look at South, look at how quickly Kherson fell. Clearly, the Russian intelligence services did their job in Kherson. Clearly, the Ukrainians took off the mines off the road. They allowed the Russian forces in without resistance. So they got it right in Kherson. They didn't get it right in Kharkiv. They didn't get it right in Kiev. And then the Russians had to transition to the next phase of the conflict, which was we're going to go straight military conflict. But, you know, it's not as easy. Regime change, if it was easy, we would have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein a long time ago. We tried a lot to get rid of Saddam Hussein. CIA, pretty good at the intelligence business. But it didn't work. We failed every time we tried because as much as we want to get rid of a regime, the regime wants to survive. And the regime has security apparatuses that counter this and all that stuff. The intelligence game is an ugly game. It ain't pretty. And I wouldn't rely on it for anything other than gathering information. The second you have to use that kind of subterfuge to achieve a political objective, it means that you sort of suck as a nation because you're trying to do something that shouldn't be done. Russia tried to give diplomacy a chance, and Russia should be given recognition. You can't sit here and stick your finger and say, oh, get rid of Zelensky. That's not how the law works. That's not how the world works. That's how novels work. That's how movies work. But it's not reality. The reality is Russia tried its best to achieve a nonviolent, peaceful resolution to this problem. And when it failed, not because of Russia's efforts, but because of France, Germany, Ukraine, the United States, and NATO, then Russia had no choice but to go to the special military operation. And even then, Russia made a decision going to go in soft because of the Russian nation. Why do you want to inflict harm on the Russian nation? Why do you want to inflict harm on Ukraine? There's a shared history here. They had a problem with the Zelensky government. They had a problem with Right Sector. They had a problem with Azov. They didn't have a problem with the Ukrainian people. But now NATO has made it a different ballgame altogether because this is a NATO army, not a Ukrainian army.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I guess like regardless of what we think, about war, it's in place, and we got to analyze it. And I'd like to go back to the question of what do you think is going to happen now, because you know, the referendums are going to happen very, very soon. Then the incorporation, then, you know, then the special military operation gets transformed into something else, obviously into something, whatever the legal structure is going to, I mean, whatever the legal kind of framework is going to be applied, it's going to be something that's going to untie the hands of the Russian army or of the, you know, of the, you know, Chechens there, and probably, possibly, I don't know, Wagner and all the other parties to that war. And I'm just wondering, what do you think? Like, what is your speculation or what is your guess, educated guess, that is going to happen now? Are they going to go to Kiev? Are they going to go to, take out those things that you took out in Iraq in 1989?
The Russian government has said that all stated objectives of the special military operation are still in play. Nothing has changed.
Okay.
So that means that Ukraine will, at the end of this, Ukraine will never be a NATO member. Never, ever, ever, ever. I mean, we can put the punctuation down there. Zelensky somehow labors under this notion that he's going to become a NATO member and Ukraine's going to be saved by NATO membership. NATO has betrayed Ukraine. They're literally fighting Russia to the last living Ukrainian. And NATO is willing to let all Ukrainians die for this objective of bleeding Russia dry, that we can do so much damage to Russia that they will never be able again to replicate this kind of military aggression. Again, losing the fact that this isn't military aggression initiated by Russia. This is a Russian military response to NATO's actions. But be that as may, Zelensky, Ukraine will never be NATO. And Russia's made that point. Two, the Ukrainian army was supposed to be demilitarized, and what that means is all NATO influence removed. Well, now that it's a NATO army, a de facto NATO army, demilitarization has been escalated thanks to NATO. And so now this means that the entire Ukrainian military must be eliminated. Russia says that's our objective. I believe Russia. They say that denazification. If you listen to Putin's speech, he pretty much targeted the entire Ukrainian government, saying they are Nazis. They are thugs who are eradicating the Russian people. So denazification means the Ukrainian government is gone. So we know what the objectives are. Now let's talk about how Russia is posturing itself to achieve the objective. It's clear that the special military operation as configured was not up to this task. It doesn't mean that they couldn't defeat the Ukrainian army. They did. They defeated the Ukrainian army. By June and July, the Ukrainian army was gone. They lost all their equipment. They lost 100,000 men. It was gone. But there was a new Ukrainian army built by NATO. And now Russia's fighting this. And so Russia realized that in order to defeat this new army, to achieve its objectives, they had to change the nature of the conflict. This starts with, and it's in parallel. The two didn't happen separately. It's not like Russia said, oh, we're going to have a referendum, and oh, by the way, we're going to do partial mobilization. First of all, look at the referendum. They've been all over the map on the referendum coming into this. They were supposed to have them a little while ago, then they didn't. Then they said, we're going to hold it back. Maybe we'll have them in November. Maybe we'll wait till 2023. Suddenly, September 23rd to 27th, we're having a referendum.
If I may, an additional question here, because my reading is that floating this idea of referendum in Kherson, they were just testing out the ground, like in Kherson or maybe in those territories that they hold in Ukraine, but also internationally to see how other people, their partners, would react, like China, India, Brazil, and my feeling is that they might be actually doing it now because after Samarkand and after this meeting there, it seems like they got the confirmation, not that they're probably going to cheer like the Chinese or the Indians for those referendums, but they're going to be relaxed about it, and I don't know, maybe even recognize it in some foreseeable future. And I'm just thinking that perhaps now, since they've got this, they can go ahead and do organize those referendums.
Or maybe they saw that NATO was so serious about challenging them and not letting them do their game in Ukraine that they had to do it as a final resort to, justify all the mobilization and the rest of the measures.
Well, the mobilization needed to occur once this became a NATO army. I spoke about that back in May, when I said when you inject tens of billions of dollars, it's a game-changing event, and it's going to require Russia to fundamentally change the nature of its operation. And the billions of dollars manifested themselves as a genuine military capacity in early September when Ukraine launched their counteroffensive. So again, the calendar is driven by NATO, not by Russia. Let's just be clear about that. Now, this is a war that's not just economic. This conflict, remember, before this conflict even started, Russia put out, as part of their diplomatic settlement, They reached out to NATO and the United States in December 17th, 2021, with draft treaties that talked about a new European security framework that recognized Russia's legitimate national security interests on its periphery and sought to create a buffer, so to speak, between NATO and Russia, to withdraw NATO infrastructure back to the 1997 boundaries, to remove, for instance, from Romanian soil, an American anti-ballistic missile base that Russia now rightly. I wish it was gone. The one that was sold as a anti-missile base, but we now know can also launch Tomahawk missiles and modified SM-6 surface-to-surface. So, did Romania know when they accepted this that they were bringing in a surface-to-surface missile capability, or were they misled by the United States? Who knows? But the point is, Russia says that's got to go, and Russia's not wrong. They're 100% correct to say that is a threat to Russia. It exists only. If you think that's about countering Iran, you don't know anything about the weapon systems involved. But the point is, Russia said, we want to do this. We want to enter into this discussion. Neither NATO nor the United States was interested. Instead, they said, no, if you dare move on Ukraine, we're going to sanction you, massive sanctions, earth-shattering sanctions. And these sanctions weren't just the kind that said, we're going to go after Putin or the oligarchs. We're going to go after all of Russia. We're going after the Russian people. We're going to crush Russia. We're going to bring harm and suffering to the Russian people to such an extent that they will have no choice but to rise up and get rid of Vladimir Putin. That's the sanctions the West wanted to impose on Russia and tried to impose on Russia. Russia flipped the script. And long story short, Russia's doing okay. The West ain't doing okay right now. I don't want to be in Europe this winter. I really don't.
Well, look, we're gonna report on the developments here extensively, because it's like it's the end of September, and I actually thought that this critical point we're gonna reach sometime in, I don't know, November, but we're already there. So
You're already
it's
there.
difficult. It's difficult for me to imagine how the things
the reason why I brought that up is that Russia's ultimate objective is a new European security framework. And NATO and the United States made it clear that they weren't willing to discuss this. And they initiated an economic war against Russia. Russia has flipped the script. And now what Russia is going to do is wait and let this economic. And remember, it's not that Russia's actively doing anything to Europe. Europe's simply committing suicide. And Russia's sitting back and watching Europe commit suicide. And they're like, wow, this is the easiest economic victory I've ever achieved, because I don't have to do anything. Just watch you commit suicide. So while Europe commits suicide, Russia turns around and pivots east, and they start opening and improving relationship with the rest of the world that isn't Europe and the United States. And there's a big world out there. I always laugh when I hear people say the world is against Russia. No, the world's actually sort of neutral or on the side of Russia. Only this pathetic little thing called the West against Russia, and the West is losing right now. Not because Russia is smarter than they are, maybe they're not. Because the West is just so fundamentally stupid. And they've enacted policies that are slitting their wrists. They didn't need to do this. This didn't need to happen, but it's happening. And now Russia's going to watch the West crumble. And all of the political and economic elites that led you down this path are going to be at risk this winter. Because there are democracies.
Exactly. For the last segment of the show, how is this going to impact Eastern Europe?
Yeah, we literally have 3 minutes.
Oh, we have to. Well, okay. Bottom line is, China, India, and everybody's on the side of Russia. Russia's going to mobilize 300,000 troops using the partial mobilization. It's not general mobilization, so it's not what I talked about in the past. There won't be the same level of economic harm on Russia. And Russia's going to win the war. Gloves come off. Ukraine's going to be shut down. If NATO wants to come in, Russia's going to shut them down. And Europe is going to collapse. I believe there's going to be revolution in the streets in Europe. I don't want there to be revolution, but Germany is particularly at risk. The disdain the German government has shown to the German people, where the foreign minister says, I don't care about the people. I'm going to support Ukraine no matter what. Enacting policies that are going to starve people, freeze people, cause people to lose their jobs. I think this is the time when you're going to see revolutionary change in Europe, and the Europe that emerges will be more likely than not to agree to the European security framework solutions put forward by Russia, which will be put on the table once Russia wins the conflict in Europe.
All right, and on that revolutionary note, we end the program. Thank you very much, Scott, and I hope I hope you come again on our show
anytime
later, so that we can continue this discussion. It's been fascinating, and
especially
many
about the war.
Very interesting points were made, and I really want to develop that. So thanks a lot for agreeing to come on our show. Thanks a lot to all people watching and listening, and please be sure to check out our channel on YouTube and our website, thebarricade.online, as well as our Substack newsletter, thebarricade.substack.com. And to the extent you feel you can afford, please support us via PayPal or Patreon. All the links are in the description box. Thank you once again, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Maria.